Oh, grade school. What's going on, everybody? Happy Grade School Monday. It's going to be a good sesh today. I'm coming to you from the camera that is behind my GUI monitor today, which I'm not going to lie, I kind of like not having to do this so much and being able to like look at my screen and look at you guys. It's kind of a vibe. What do you guys think of it? Who's in the room today? How y'all doing? How y'all feeling? What's going on? Today we're talking about DRTs. We're going deep on DRTs. We talked about DRTs in our last grade school. We just did a video on OpenDRT. We got another video coming this week on another DRT that many of you guys know and love that is going to be a really good one. But today is your opportunity to dig even deeper into this topic on DRTs. So if you've got questions, I'm going to say this, especially if you've got dumb questions that feel dumb, that you're like, oh, I feel awkward asking this, or I feel like everyone already knows this, drop that question in the chat. I promise you are not going to be the only one. This is one of those topics that like, it's always the dumb. I'm going to say this. It's not even this topic. That's just true in general of learning color grading and actually anything else. The dumbest questions are actually the ones that lead to the smartest answers, like to the best takeaways. So if you got your dumb questions, drop those in hot especially. But of course, I want to hear dumb questions, smart questions everywhere in between. How's everybody feeling? What's going on? Increase the volume, Kareem. Absolutely not. I got two levers for that. I've got a volume knob within my my OBS, and then I can just talk way the heck louder. But let's go with the first one to get started here. A little volume boost. My buddy Raf is here with me. What's going on, Raf?
Hello, hello. Yeah, as I was saying a second ago, I've been doing everything that a filmmaker can do, from editing, from to shooting, doing color in the middle. So my summer is going pretty well. And also going to film festivals, which is a new experience for me. So that's also great.
Summer's popping for Raf. By the way, we got started right on time today. I didn't even check Raf's audio ahead of time, but it looks like it's coming through loud and clear. So if y'all are not hearing my buddy Rafa, then let me know that I'm the only one having a conversation with him. And that should be a little bit better on audio as well. Let me switch to my Resolve for a minute and boost the audio on this side so I don't forget about it. And then we can party. Get those questions ready. If you don't have it already, grab a pen and paper. This is definitely an area where concepts and retention of big ideas are actually more important than like, oh, what is the recipe? Like if you're just learning color management, and you guys can drop in the chat, let me know if I'm right about this, if this tracks with your experience. If you're just learning like color management, for example, you can follow my directions or directions from anybody who has the right recipe to say like, oh, well, you want to go into your project settings and flip this switch and set that drop down. And now you have your color management working. And like just knowing what switches to flip, that's enough when you're learning color management. At this level that we're at here, talking about DRTs and being mindful of our DRT, sourcing a DRT, whether within Resolve or from a third party like the DCTLs that we've been talking about here lately, that requires a little bit stronger grasp of the concepts and of the end goal that you are pursuing, as opposed to just like blindly following a recipe, right? So this is definitely one of those sessions. Grab your pen, grab your paper, grab your Apple Notes, whatever you write stuff down with, because otherwise what's going to happen, I say it here in grade school all the time, you're going to hear me say it, you might have to have it repeated or play it back one or two times, and you'll be like, okay, cool, I got it. But you don't got it. It's going to go away. It's going to fly right back out of your brain after the session ends. So write this stuff down. All right, let's go look at this chat. Who's in the room? Oh, JP's in the house. Sweet. Who else is here? Ryan's here. Joe, PK. Amazing. Oh, Noir grade. I'm glad you're here, buddy. I really appreciate all your comments and engagement within this community, and I'm loving your videos as well. All right, gang. I'm going to kick it to Rafa. I'm going to get loose on some Zevia soda. Can you guys see that? And I'm going to kick it to Raf. What do we got today? What do y'all want to know about?
We have a question about when to use OpenDRT and when to use JP2499. Do you have any recommendation for using one or the other?
Oh, this is a cool question. Yeah, so we've got JP in the room, in the house right now. So JP, let us know in the chat. I'd love to hear your answer to that, dude. But here's the thing. Like, these are both great DRTs. They have different ways of giving you lots of flexibility, right? So like, let's get into Resolve. Let's get hands on with this. We're gonna take a minute to explore this, and I'll give you like the spoiler alert right now. There's no like easy, simple answer to this. It's like, oh, well, just always use OpenDRT or like always use 2499. They're both great DRTs. They both can get you great things. And it's not like, oh, 2499 is perfect for commercials and OpenDRT is perfect for features or something like that. There's no cut and dry methodology like that. It has more to do with this. Here would be like the sort of top level idea that you would want to apply here. It is about the control that you want to exert over your image and the way that you want to exert that control. So we've got a video coming up this week on 2499 where we're going to dive deep on all the params within JP's DRT. But essentially, like if we look at, we're going to start with, let me turn my reference monitor on here. That'd be a good idea, right? Come on, colorist. Do your job. Get these thumbnails updated. I think I was looking at an HDR thing before. And let's find a good picture to play around with. All right, it's all happening. It's all grooving. So, OpenDRT. Actually, I'm on 2499 right now, but let's start with OpenDRT since we've been talking about that the last couple of weeks. We did our deep dive on it in a dedicated video recently. So, as we observed with OpenDRT, your main levers of controlling the way the image is rendered in OpenDRT are really here and here, and your creative white to a lesser extent, but it's certainly part of the stack here. These three drop downs are really what are going to let you control your rendering. And there are some that are closer together than others, but generally speaking, like just as a recap, you've got your look presets here, and then you can have a tone scale preset that by default follows this look preset. So now I'm actually changing all three of these just by changing this. You follow what I'm saying there? Just like the logic of the plugin. That's a good recap for anyone who is in need of it for OpenDRT. Right now, I'm controlling OpenDRT's rendering of the image and getting like very different results between default, colorful, umbra, and base. Like umbra and base are like, it's great that they're next to each other because like, wow, look at that difference. Those are very, very different images, right? Now, that's like if I wanted to have everything follow my look preset, I would do it like this. I can also chunk these or break these out so that they are independent from the look preset. And now the look preset is really just going to control my color rendering. The tone scale preset is going to control my contrast, and the creative white is going to control the warmth of my shoulder, the warmth of the bright area of the image, okay? And we do have some additional control over how that creative white behaves up here on our creative white range. So really what I'm doing right now, guys, I promise on task answering the question at hand of like, all right, well, which one is preferable in what situations, 2499 versus OpenDRT? Really the only way to answer that is to reorient ourselves to like, what are the levers of control that each DRT offers to us, okay? So what OpenDRT offers to us is a look preset, which we can then kind of break apart into pieces of tone scale preset versus the implicit color preset that this then becomes up here, right? So that's going to be the way we can control both our color rendering up here and then our contrast or our tone scale preset down below. And we did a whole deep dive video on this on the channel here recently if you haven't seen that, or if you haven't checked out our last episode of Grade School where we were also diving deep on DRTs and you're interested in this topic, definitely go check those things out. It's going to make everything we talk about today make a lot more sense or make the dots kind of connect for you a little bit more. So does that make a little more sense now for you guys? But like, okay, just recapping the levers of control within OpenDRT. What kind of control does this DRT afford us and how can we use it in terms of like a practical imaging flow? And what I'll say is like, we're going to now look at the same thing within JP's 2499. And the fun thing is like all of these levers of control can take you to a interesting outcome. Like there's very little sort of like dead space within here where it's like, oh, I would never want that. I would never do that. Or even worse, like that, if I do that, is going to cause breakage or problems in my image. It's a very clean, very versatile DRT. So no matter what combos you find yourself landing on here, the only thing you got to go on is how you like the image as opposed to needing to play defense and being like, yeah, but is that going to, like stab me in the back when I'm not looking and leave me with a DRT that doesn't work for a certain type of shot when I find that out at like shot 500 of 1,000 or whatever it is. So lots of different options here, and they're all going to be clean and do a nice job as long as you like the fundamental rendering that you're getting, okay? So those are your degrees of control, look, tone scale, and creative white, or you can just set your overall white point, okay? And I actually think there's a even newer version of OpenDRT that came out after we dropped our video, and I haven't updated to that yet. So I think there's maybe a curve overlay that Jed just dropped in there. Jed, are you in the house? Not yet. Oh, Jet's here. Amazing. Yeah, I think I saw you dropped a curve overlay on here, which is a great idea. But anyway, the fundamental degrees of control are going to be the same. So let's now look at 2499. 2499 is a different animal for sure. And some of this, like I'm going to go kind of high level here because like JP built something really, really cool and it requires a little bit more effort, I would say, to understand what's happening here. So maybe that's the first thing I would call out is you've got drop downs that you can kind of toggle in between with OpenDRT, where with 2499, the way we exert the equivalent control over the way our image is rendered, it's done with these sliders, okay? So we've got essentially 3 sets of sliders. Now I will call out to you guys, and we've got our density slider up here as a 10th standalone thing. I will call out, anytime, this is like great rule of thumb, anytime you're using a color grading tool, a DCTL, something built into Resolve, any color grading tool, an OpenFX plugin, here's a really good hack for like simplifying the overwhelm that can accompany using a new tool. So we just called out, there's 10 sliders in here. If you're brand new to a tool, that can feel kind of overwhelming. At least it can for me, right? Here's the thing to remember. It's really not 10 sliders. It's 4 sliders. Because once you understand what overall rotate hue R does, and highlight rotate hue R, and purity R, G and B, G and B, and G and B from each of these sets, you know they're going to do the exact same thing, just for your green and your blue instead of for your red, okay? So that's a really great way to kind of chunk out and break down the sliders, the controls for any new tool that you're playing around with. Anytime you have controls for RGB, might sound obvious, but it's really helpful to say explicitly to yourself, like, all right, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to learn density, rotate hue R, overall rotate hue R, highlight rotate hue R, and purity R. That's all I'm going to learn. I'm going to pretend these don't exist just for a minute, okay? Because once you get it, once you understand this and this and this, it could not travel more easily to your GNB. But if you bite them all off at once and you're trying to get them all sort of like downloaded into your brain at once, it can feel more complex than it really is, okay? So that's one good thing to call out. But the other thing I was going to mention here is like, again, instead of drop-down menus like we have with Jed's OpenDRT, those being the primary drivers of our creative control of the way the DRT renders the image, we have sliders. That's really the only creative control we have in 2499 is driven by these sliders. You could say this HDR method is kind of a creative control, and it certainly has an impact on the rendering of the image, but that's something we go deeper on in this forthcoming video this week, and something that we can even talk more about it today, but for now we're going to focus on these sliders. So let's do this. And I think Thatcher, did I see you in the house as well? Time to put Thatcher on blast. I've got my MVPs, my all-stars in the house today. Thatcher made a really cool tool called RGB chips. This is a free DCTL. Rafa, if you can, or anyone in the chat, if you've got that link handy, or Thatcher, if you've got it handy, drop it in the chat for us so that these guys can go level up their RGB chips game and get this DCTL in line. I love this DCTL for all kinds of things, but definitely for auditing DRTs, because it gives us, like I've talked about this in both of in our OpenDRT video and also in the one we've got coming out in 2499. One of the challenges with evaluating DRTs is that when you're looking at one image going through a DRT, you're only looking at one image going through that DRT, and a DRT is all about the system-wide, like the macro level processing of lots of different images with lots of different types of pixels. So we really want to get a lens on like, okay, it's not enough for me to know how this DRT will treat this image or that image or that image. I want to know at a system level, how will it treat a wide variety of pixels? And specifically with Thatcher's RGB chips here, what we're doing is we're making exposure sweeps from very low to very high in these defined 36 hue bands. And if you want to make this really simple, again, like simplifying things for like learning new tools or like learning to read what we're seeing here, I'm all about like, this is a great principle to take away from our conversation today. When you're trying to learn something, when you're trying to understand something, when you're trying to master something, or even just kind of get your first grip on it, what's the simplest thing that you can do? How can you make it as simple and dumb as possible? And then you can always stack on top of that. So one way that we can make this thing really simple and dumb is put it down to 3 hues. Now, tell me if I'm crazy. Let me know in the chat. Does this not seem a lot easier to understand what's going on in this chart when I drop it down to 3 hues? Let me know in the chat. Am I crazy, or does that make it a lot easier to understand what's going on? Because now we're just looking at exposure sweeps of red, green, and blue. And here's the fun thing. We're going on lots of tangents, but we're covering a lot of good ground here, okay? Here's the fun thing. The difference between like, okay, I was just at 36 a moment ago, and now I dropped it to 3. And just having called out, oh, okay, so that's a lot simpler, and observing what's happening on my vector scope, I can immediately bump back up to 36, and now it makes more sense. Does that track for you guys? Does this not seem easier to understand just having gone down to 3? That's the power of going down to something simpler and then expanding back out. You get the idea. Let's keep it at 3 for now. And what I really want to talk about here is how we can evaluate and learn what 2499 is doing to the image based on our RGB chips feeding through the DRT. So the thing I'm going to call out here is one of the differences with 2499 versus OpenDRT. 2499 does not offer explicit contrast control. The closest that you can come is this density slider here, which is going to increase. You could say it's increasing contrast. I like to think about this as a saturation versus exposure adjustment. So this is increasing the contrast or decreasing the exposure of higher saturated stuff. Okay. It's not meant to replace that same principle in look development. It's meant to give you the right foundation. At least I think that's the intent there, JP. You can let me know in the chat if I'm crazy. But that's really the only form of contrast control, and it's not what we would typically think of as, it's not a strict tonal contrast control. That's actually just fixed in 2499, okay? So instead, the focus, the creative freedom that we have within 2499 has to do with color and the way it's rendered. Now, question for you guys. Again, we talk about this. I feel like I'm blowing up my own video that's about to come out, but this stuff, if you guys are like me, kind of bears repeating. And for me, everything that I'm talking about today, it stuck for me after about the 50th time hearing it, reading it, learning it, asking about it. So I don't think any harm in covering some of these things more than once. So the freedom that we have here is with our color, as I said. And I was going to ask you guys this question. How many of y'all have ever looked at a hue loop like this? Have ever seen this happening on your vector scope where you've got some kind of exposure sweep of a color and you're looking at this nifty little kind of fishhook situation going on in the chat? How many of you guys have seen this, thought, oh, that's neat, and then gone, I wonder what the heck that means or why that's happening, and really don't have a clue or didn't have an idea as to why that's happening or what it represents? Let me know in the chat. Do not be shy. I forget what I set our, our latency to. I'm hooked on like... There might come a day, guys, where I'm just going to drag us all over into a Zoom webinar because I love interacting with you guys. Yeah, John, the fishhook is key. That's right. Yeah, so you guys can at least answer to yourself. How many of you have seen this fishhook and been like, that's kind of neat, wonder what it means, wonder what the heck it represents? Here's what it represents. So we're seeing these sweeps right now. And if you notice, like, let's just focus on our red. I lied, actually, when I asked the question, like, what can we do to make this as simple as possible? We can get even dumber here. I'm such a believer in making stuff dumb and in making it so that I'm like, oh, that's too simple for me to understand. So right now I'm just going to crop off my RGB chips and we're just going to look at our red fishhook, for example, so we can really focus in on this. And now you can start to correlate without me even telling you anything else, just by me giving you a simplified param for your RGB chips and then blanking things out. You could probably figure this out in about 30 seconds without me saying anything else, right? But I love to talk about this stuff, so spoiler, I'm going to say some more things. But check out what's happening here. Look, we're going from very low exposed red to very high exposed red. And where is our saturation peaking? Well, it's peaking in the middle here, right? Do we have much saturation down here in the bottom? No. Do we have saturation up here on the top? Very little, right? So what are we seeing here? We are seeing the path that our hue and saturation is traveling as we climb out of black, reach peak, and then ascend toward white. And we start merging toward white or following what's called in DRTs the path to white, which is something that both OpenDRT and 2499 are capable of doing really, really well. And that, like I'm beating up on the Resolve CST as like, but it's not just because it's bad and it makes for a dramatic comparison, but it's because most of us, me included, have used that as like our baseline DRT for a really long time. By the way, if you're just joining grade school, if you don't know what in the world we're talking about and what we're diving into, what this fishhook DRT DCTL madnesses that we're getting into, drop a question in the chat. Happy to give you a brief update to it. Also encourage checking out my recent DRT video, my recent video on OpenDRT, and our last episode of grade school if you really want to get the full picture here. But if you're lost and you're like, whoa, I want to be here, but I don't know what you're talking about, drop a question in the chat. For now, I'm going to keep on trucking and say, like, so we're climbing. This is our path. We're climbing from black, really low exposed red, all the way out to where our saturation peaks. And then it is starting to lose saturation as we bleach or as we follow our path to white, right? Now, here's what's interesting. Here's what I love about 2499. It allows you to explicitly control this hue loop. By the way, this hue loop, stuff traveling out on one axis and returning on another, this is a hallmark of film. And it's a hallmark of film that is not just going to help you emulate film. It's just going to help you get better images. It just looks good. And we'll see that here in just a second. But what's great about 2499, after all that preamble, is I've got my hue rotations for my red, green, and blue. Green and blue for any of these three triplets doesn't even matter right now because I've blanked that out. So all I need to worry about is my overall rotate hue R, highlight rotate hue R, and purity R. So let's watch what happens with my overall rotate hue R. That's essentially going to change the outbound path as I climb my tone scale. What are we doing here? We're saying input of pure red, where should that plot? Should that land, like target the red target here on my vector scope? Should it skew more yellowy? Should it skew more magenta? So we've got tons of control there. And then we can control that return path here with our highlight rotation. Okay? So we can literally use this to control our hue path. And this is a great example of this is like some of my favorite control that you get in 2499. This is also a great example of why we need things like Thatcher's RGB chips here, because seeing that dramatic change in the hue loop, it's going to be tough to find any one image that makes it anywhere near as easy and obvious to track what's happening. You can see that stuff is happening. Like, it's not that it doesn't have a meaningful impact on the image, but to get that sort of like macro understanding of what's happening, the RGB chips are indispensable. And especially with these highlight rotates, because they're intentionally less sensitive and more narrow and focused than the overalls. Okay. So these are the controls. I would say the overall rotate hue R, the highlight rotate hue R, and just to round out the conversation, we've got these couple of other controls for 2499 for shaping the color of the image. We've got our purity. That's just, this is a loose correlation, but it's essentially going to be your saturation. Okay. So the further you go out, the more saturated you're going to get in your red, green, and your blue. And then you've got your density up here, which we talked about briefly already. So those are the levers of control available to you within 2499 versus the levers of control available to you within OpenDRT. They have a different format, sliders versus dropdowns. One is more focused explicitly on fine-tuned shaping of your color palette. The other parameters within OpenDRT are more focused on an overall color rendering and an overall contrast rendering that you don't have the same options for within 2499. Longish answer, even by Cullen standards, but that's the full context that I would use to evaluate that decision, because it would lead me to say, like, all right, where do I want to have the control for a given image? Or here's an even simpler way to look at it. With 2499 and with OpenDRT, another great thing about both of these DRTs, you don't have to do anything. You can drop them naked onto your stack and do absolutely nothing, and you will get a very nice looking image. So the other much simpler question you can ask is like, all right, I don't want to mess with any of this. I just know that Cullen said to try these DRTs out instead of a CST, and I can see the improvement in the image rendering when he demonstrates that for me. So I'm going to get my feet wet and dive in, look at both options and decide which one you like better. And don't change a thing in either one. Just look at which one gives you a better baseline and use that for a while. That would be an even simpler way to look at it. But hope that gives you guys a bigger context, bigger picture for the controls and the sort of advantages of each of these DRTs.
Very fun question here about DRTs as well. Can you use, for example, JP2499 in color composite mode color just for the hue rotation properties? And then, for example, use OpenDRT in composite mode luminosity to keep the contrast. Essentially, blending two DRTs for different purpose.
We've got some mad scientists in the house. I feel like this is like this is like those like Frankenstein toys in Toy Story when they go over to Sid's house and they've got like the like like the I forget what it is, like the legs of a doll and then like the head of a dinosaur that have been like grafted together in Toy Story. I guess I feel kind of the same way about combining these things in the way you're describing as I do about Sid's Frankenstein dolls. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I'm not sure that it's like I wouldn't prefer just one or the other of the original. I would say like here's the thing, guys. Separating out contrast and color, that is like a convenient illusion for us. Like they're very, very, very interactive. And I know I literally just got done talking about the distinct like dimensions of contrast and color, but they're highly interactive. So I'd say that's something you could definitely experiment with, but you're going to have two caveats there. Number one, the beauty of both of the DRTs we're talking about today is how stable they are and how nicely they handle all possible inputs. So you've got a really robust, really stable DRT that you know is going to handle whatever you throw at it. That goes away when you start doing science experiments like you're talking about. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do those or that you can't do those, but it does mean that you now need to be babysitting much more actively, right? And then the other thing that I would say is when you're looking at combining those two things in that way, I'm trying to think of a good way to put this. I think maybe the first point is the best one to emphasize. You're basically removing the sanity check and all those very meticulously installed like bumpers and like guarantees of smoothness that have been installed or implemented in both systems. And you're better off picking one that looks better to you, that looks closest to your creative intent, and then using your upstream creative look to dial things in even further. Like everything that we just did on both of these plugins, I've got a look happening here in my look development plugin Contour that is shaping my image the rest of the way there. And for those of you guys who've been following recently my terminology, the way that I like to think about this stuff, everything happening here at the timeline level, this is what's called my print. The print can often come in two steps where you've got a creative look happening in scene space and then you've got a DRT that is giving you your kind of baseline technical rendering to get out to display. It's not quite as clean a division as that, but that's the idea. That two-step process, that combined print is going to be the most common thing that you will, or the most common type of print you'll do in a modern color workflow. And that's what I'd say as well is like no DRT, no matter how good, I'm not going to use a DRT in the normal sense of the word without a look. It's always going to stack with a look to form a print for me. Now, that doesn't mean we can't have a single step print, but that single step print would not be a DRT. You follow me? I'm introducing a lot of new terminology and ideas to you guys, even if it's like kind of stacking on things that we've discussed on the channel here for a long time. So again, DRT is what is putting the image on the screen it's fundamentally serving a technical role. Like, again, I don't want to discredit or discount the great aesthetic job that we get out of OpenDRT and $24.99. But the thing that I can't live without from $24.99 or from OpenDRT is like, well, I don't have an image until that. Like that's what I need is that baseline technical rendering. I just also want it to be aesthetic and not solely technical. Okay. But when you combine that with your look, that's where you are really going to get that full print. And that look itself, once you get past selecting the right DRT and kind of dialing in the right baseline, that look is really where I'm going to spend the most amount of time trying to dial in the exact rendering that I want and forming the exact overall print that I'm looking for.
How does a lookup table interact with DRT? For example, usually lookup tables, color managed lookup tables take into account your DRT to produce a result. So what happens, for example, if you use a lookup table that expects you to use resolve color management, but you use another solution like OpenDRT or JP2499?
Oh man, who's bringing the fire questions today? That is such a good question. Grab a pen and pay attention to the answer here, guys. This is a great question to answer. I'm going to answer this question with a story. Check this out. Let's just go to a fresh image here. So, a while back, let's go, we're going to go old school for a second here. We're going to go with a CST. I literally, the only reason I have a Resolve CST in my outs power grades over here is so that I can beat up on it. Sorry, Resolve CSTs. Like, I actually like it. I think it was when CSTs became a thing in Resolve, like I've been using Resolve long enough to remember that. It was actually like a pretty huge step forward, because until that point, I think it was pretty much just aces. That was the only other way you could kind of color manage your image. Or you could do what I'd been doing at the time, which is like painfully cooking out every single LUT that you wanted to use to manage your image. So, rest in peace, CSTs, but like you had a good run, and like you've served me well for many years. So no, I don't want to throw too much shade at the CST, but at this point, it lives here strictly so I can use it as a punching bag. Sorry, CST. You deserve better. So check this out. Here's the story that I'm going to tell you guys. A little while back, I released a set of LUTs many of you guys are familiar with called Voyager. Okay? And let's just look at, it's been a minute since I opened these. Where's my favorite? I think Nirvana is kind of a fan favorite of Voyager. These are, exactly as the question points to, these are scene-referred LUTs, DaVinci Wide Gamut to DaVinci Wide Gamut. They take DaVinci Wide Gamut in, they return DaVinci Wide Gamut. All they do is impart some creative character to the image along the way. I made these LUTs. I am super proud of these LUTs to this day. I had so much fun making them. They were low-key my obsession for like a year, and they look phenomenal. They were all built under Resolve CSTs because I was still like not as sworn off of them as I am today. But the even bigger reason was I was like, look, most people use Resolve CSTs. So if I'm going to make a product that is going to serve as many people as possible, as well as possible, it should probably be built through that lens. Make sense? So that was how I built all these. But here's the story. Here's what I observed. Let's just go back to, I don't know why I'm bouncing around shots so much. I got trigger happy finger today. So check this out. I'm going to grab a still of this. Here's what I noticed. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember the first DRT that this happened with, but basically what I noticed was like, oh, if I swap in a better DRT under a well-built look, generally speaking, the image just looks better. Like, there's some caution to be had there, because as you bring up the question, like if the look wasn't built under the DRT you're looking at it under, then essentially there's no guarantee that anyone's ever seen what you're looking at, much less that the designer has seen it, much less that they've evaluated it critically and made sure that it is doing what they want, right? You track with me on that? So like you're kind of on your own. However, if it's a well-built DRT, let's just audition what that looks like. Let's do OpenDRT here versus the Resolve CST. And let's go with, I don't know, let's go with our high contrast just for fun. So like, yeah, again, this was not with OpenDRT that I made this. Maybe Aces 2 is an interesting one. Let's go with Aces 2. This makes my point really well for this image with this DRT. But like what I noticed when I swapped out my DRT for one that I'd never designed that look to ride under, I was like, oh, it actually looks better. Like I prefer this rendering to this rendering. So there's kind of two aspects to that. Like, as I said, you want to be mindful that you are potentially viewing an image that no one ever signed off on, much less they validated and made sure it was going to be really robust and work great. However, you will often find if you improve your DRT, you improve your overall print, and your look actually looks better through that DRT than it did before. Now, one of the advantages of having something like Contour, which I was on before, is like what I see when I first loaded up OpenDRT versus the Resolve CST a minute ago, and the reason I flipped my tone scale preset off of high contrast is I was like, that's feeling a little chunky, like it's a little bit thick. But if we look at, where are my presets here? You know, if this was a contour preset instead of a LUT, then I could simply go in and say, all right, we got to go a little bit less crazy with that contrast and maybe scoop the black point a little bit. Like I could go in and maybe tune or tweak my look a little bit in order to make it operate better through that new lens. But the original question was about scene-referred LUTs designed to work under DRT-A being applied under DRT-B. Is it okay? What should I keep in mind? Yes, it's totally okay. Sometimes it can even get you a better result if DRT-B is actually better than DRT-A. However, you don't want to take that for granted. You want to double check that it is looking good and doing what you want underneath. And if it's not, then ideally you would want to tweak the look or the LUT so that you can get the best baseline rendering possible. Great question.
More questions about DRTs. The question is essentially why there are so many DRTs out there? Wouldn't it be better to simply have one standard solution and then grade underneath that, rather than applying color transformations on the output side?
Man, I like you guys, just by asking these questions and then exploring them among each other, especially because you've got some heavy hitters who I'm curious from Jed and JP, how many hours of your life have you devoted to that exact question and to any possible valid answers to it? It's a great question. Here's the thing to keep in mind. We actually had exactly what you're talking about for 100 years. Like, until very recently, we had that. It was set that way, and it just worked, and everyone agreed on it, and everyone worked underneath it, and it was magical and beautiful. Everyone know what I'm talking about when I refer to that? I'm talking about the good old days of film. Like, I'm not mad that film is no longer the dominant mode of capture or reproduction for movies, because it has all kinds of frailties and limitations that we don't need to be bound by anymore, and it's very exciting. However, the number one problem that we had solved with film that we're still 20 years later only just now beginning to reclaim the high ground of, or like the quality level of, is like, with film, that pipeline was set. You knew what was going to happen between the capture of the image and the reproduction of the image with very little variability. Okay. At least if you're talking about, if I narrow the scope a little bit, if you're talking about, okay, I'm making a movie that people are going to watch, like it's going to be shown in a theater. That means it's going to be printed onto one of a handful of print stocks. It's going to have a guaranteed rendering path. Okay. We don't have that anymore today. And so your question is a great one. We're like, all right, shouldn't we? Like, how can we simplify this process and standardize it in some kind of way so that we've got all the creative freedom that we need, but without the possibility of really whack outcomes? Like, I'm going to give you this example here. It's not possible to talk about good DRTs without illustrating the deficiencies of bad DRTs. So check this out. This is not going to look correct quite at first, but I'm going to use, this is a DRT, by the way, guys. I don't think I made this. I think this is built into Resolve natively. This is just Red's DRT for their cameras. Here's a fun thing. This could be a whole other video, a whole other conversation we could have. You can treat camera manufacturer LUTs as DRTs baked into a LUT, because that's exactly what they are. They are theoretically optimized for a particular camera, but my experience is that's not really a thing. They're just optimized for the general reproduction priorities of whoever made them, right? So it's not that it will work perfectly for Red, but it falls apart on everything else. In my experience, it works about the same for all cameras, which is either good, great, or terrible, right? But track with me here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tee up. Right now I'm using this LUT. I'm telling this LUT a lie. I'm telling this LUT, or rather I'm participating in a lie of feeding in an image that isn't actually what I'm feeding in. So before I did this, I am feeding DaVinci wide gamut intermediate, but it is expecting, as you can see in the name, red wide gamut log 3G10. So I need to make that lie true. How do I do that? Convert DaVinci wide gamut intermediate to red wide gamut RGB log 3G10. And let's just kind of clean up the stack for a second here. Okay, so this is my red rendering. So this is a great example. Like, this just looks bad. Like, this is one of a million paths that look bad, but like, this looks bonkers bad to me. Like, the display gray just feels bad to me. Sorry for offending you guys at Red, but like this, I could not be less of a fan of this particular DRT. But this is a very popular DRT because it's what ships with one of the major cameras in the field. Another one, like these like Sony S-Log things, let's just change our params now. So now I'm teeing up Sony. They just don't look very good. Like, they look weird, So anyway, I'm all of this is really just an illustration of the point that that your question exactly raises, which is like, how do we guarantee and standardize and avoid really like problematic, like undesired outcomes in a modern digital landscape? And the best answer that I have for you guys is that, like, now 20 years some odd into, like digital being the dominant mode of capture and reproduction of motion images, the options are there. Like early on, I can remember, like, gosh, I've heard stories now from several of the colorists I've interviewed. Among them, I think Jill Bogdanowicz and Maxine Gervais and Siggy Firstel as well, if memory serves, talking about like, oh yeah, the early days of DI, they're like, we didn't even have LUTs. Like LUTs didn't exist. There was no way to apply a 3D transformation to the image in order to preview what it was going to look like when we filmed out, or in order to give an equivalent rendering for the digital landscape, like, or a digital pipeline. Like they just didn't exist, right? So like, not only were there, like, were we like opening up and saying, oh, there's not one pipeline, there are many pipelines, where there were many pipelines, but the only ones that you wanted, you couldn't get, of like a filmic rendering, for example, okay? That's not the case anymore. 20 years on, if you want a filmic rendering, you can get that. You can get a good rendering of your image. I'm not even going to say filmic. If you just want a good rendering, you can get that out of $24.99, OpenDRT, other resources that are out there. The challenge that falls to us is we do have to be the ones to find it and to choose it, right? Like just because it exists doesn't mean that it's guaranteed. Like we might find ourselves landing on this rendering. And just as a, sort of like thought experiment for you guys, like just think about how much more difficulty I'm going to have grading this versus being under $24.99 like we were looking at a minute ago. It's just going to be harder, right? So like that DRT that's why it's so important, and it's why we want to really be mindful of selecting the right one, specifically because there isn't a standardized system for it. And I would say that so far, attempts at doing so seem to just fracture things even more. Like ACES 1.3 ACES 1 was the first attempt at that. That led to ACES 2.0. And I feel like there's an equivalent backlash to any support for those systems of people saying like, yeah, but I don't like that. Like you're telling me that's got to be my standard forever? Like there are some people, I know lots of colorists actually who are like, oh yeah, I love ACES, I always use ACES. But there's lots of colorists I know who are like, dude, you're telling me that's it? Absolutely not. I will find something better, right? So I'm not sure that's going to get better anytime soon. But what we can do is educate ourselves like you guys are doing right now and select the DRT and the imaging pipeline that's going to give us the best outcome for what we're looking for.
We've talked about using different solutions for going to your output destination, but what about for your input? Is there any difference, for example, using ACES to bring array footage, for example, into your working space than using Resolve Color Management or any other solution?
Great question. Yeah, let's chop this up. So we've talked a whole bunch about DRTs, or essentially about the color space transform or the mapping that has to happen to get from graded scene space image to graded display state image, right? And now we're asking a great question of like, all right, are there any of those same benefits to be had in changing the way that we map into our grading space from our camera space? So this is a complex topic that I'm going to try to make as simple as I can. Moving from one sensitivity to another, from like the sensitivity of like, let's track with me here. We're gonna make a hands-on example of this, and we're gonna do things a little bit differently than I normally would. We are going to say, I would like to use AreaLog C3 as my working space. Okay, and I'm choosing that specifically because it is both a common camera color space and a common working space. There are entire like color facilities who are standardized around grading in log C3 regardless of the source format. Okay, so it ticks two important boxes for me. Now let's flip through here and find something that ain't log C3, which I think is going to be a hard hunt. Literally every one of these might be log C3. Log C4. There we go. This is not my first choice because it's still a Arri camera. Yeah, let's mix this up here. Here, I know what to do. I know exactly what to do. I'm going to flip over to, you guys are going to be looking at me for a second so I can go digging through my footage drawers without anyone peeping over my shoulder, without embarrassing myself with whatever is lurking within here unsuspectedly. So let's find some footage from another camera. I'm going to find some, let's grab some red stuff here. Okay, sure. This will do. And I'm going to drop this into my timeline and get my share back on here. All right, so check this out. So we're going to color manage this a little bit differently. This is a red R3D. I'm going to assign this to a group rather for red. But within here, instead of mapping from red, I'm going to map to airy wide gamut 3 log C3. Okay, I'm doing this for a specific reason. So there's wide gamut 3 log C3. Now, let's not even think about the output transform for a minute. We're just going to focus on this first leg of the journey. Remember, for those of you guys who are newer to color management or it's been a while since you thought about this stuff, we basically color manage in 2 steps always. We move from our camera space to our working space. That's what we're doing right here, red to airy log C3. Working space is just a convenient common ground for all the footage to gather, where it's going to be in one common metric. It's going to feel like consistent from one shot to the next, and where it allows us to operate in what I usually call a image-centric as opposed to a camera-centric methodology, meaning that your controls feel the same. You're in the same working space, no matter what the footage was originally shot on. That doesn't matter to you as much anymore. All that matters to you is what you see and responding to the opportunities or to the challenges that you see to get the strongest possible image. Okay, so that's the first step of our color management journey. And again, just to recap it, the question is, okay, well, we're talking about in that second step, how much benefit we can net out of doing a different non-standard mapping from working space, in this case that would be airy log C3, into display space, right? The question is there any of the same or similar benefit that we can net from changing the way we input map our image? So here's going to be the way that I'll break this down for you guys. The way that this works right here, this color space transform that's taking me from red wide gamut RGB log 3 G10 to airy wide gamut 3 airy log C3, very catchy, I know, right? The thing that's taking me from there to the next point, it is the same basic vehicle that's very standardized in like throughout color science. Here's what it is. If you want to write this down, if you want to geek out, like this is some great color science 101. I kind of found my way into basic color science from wanting to understand color management better. So that's exactly what we're doing right here. It's a 3-step process that is standardized thing that's happening in a CST. It's also what's happening in an ACES transform. That's what I'm driving at here. Okay. 3-step process. First of all, we're going to strip off the log encoding here. Okay. Or we are going to decode it or flip it back to linear. Okay. So in stage 2, like let's actually, this is a fun color science side mission that is worth going on. So I'm going to label these as we go along. We're going to say to linear. So in this first step, what I'm basically doing right now is showing you what happens under the hood in any time you're doing a CST or an ACES transform. Red wide gamut, red log 3G10 to red wide gamut linear. Okay. Next, we're going to change primaries. We're going to go to airy wide gamut 3. So we're going to stay linear. Like a L log, you don't deserve to be the first in the L's. I'm sorry. We're going to say red wide gamut RGB to airy wide gamut 3. Okay. That's just a small change in like what's red, what's green, what's blue. If we want, again, we can use Thatcher's chips to slightly better visualize this. Let's put this into, this is just the way that I'm teeing up these chips so that they're showing us what we want to see. Now this is going to look kind of crazy right now because we're in linear, but we'll see it make more sense in just a minute. So we're moving into a new primary set, okay? And then the last thing we are going to apply our log encoding. So we're going to go from red wide gamut RGB, or rather airy wide gamut 3 linear, to airy wide gamut 3 airy log C3. So I mislabeled that. We actually want to go log C3. Okay. So this right here, these 3 steps, this is just what's happening in a normal CST, just broken into 3 steps. Okay. Now, the reason I went into all that detail, and you can remember every inch of what I just showed you or not, that doesn't matter as much as understanding that process, linearize, change the primaries, go to the new log encoding. That's the way basically all color space transformation works. And all at once, it is insufficient. Like what we're really asserting here when we do this is we're saying, I'm going to remap the sensitivity of this image. I'm going to change it as if it had been sensitized the way an Arri wide gamut 3 sensor would have been is sensitized. That's what we are essentially claiming or attempting when we do this. That basically does not work. Like if you really get down to it, it does not work. There is no way to match one sensitivity to another in a meaningful way for a variety of very geeky color science reasons, but it actually does not work. That means that like, if you guys came here to have your faith shaken, like the bedrock of color management doesn't really work. Like it kind of works in like general principle and like it's not completely dysfunctional, but the real idea that this, and now that we've seen the 3 steps, let's simplify and just go directly to our destination. The idea that this will net you an image that has that has the same properties as if it had been captured in these sensitivities, it doesn't quite work. Okay, so I promise I'm getting around to a big point to sort of wrap our lasso this whole conversation around. So it's not sufficient, but it is functional. Okay, it is not sufficient for a forensic match, but it is functional. And there are other benefits to what I just showed you. Namely, even though it might have seemed like a lot seeing it for the first time, that's actually a very simple system. Linearize, apply a matrix, then apply a new log encoding. It's a very simple system. It's very unlikely to introduce artifacts or problems into the image. It has a lot going for it in terms of being simple and clean. Okay, that's the reason why we use it as our foundation. Now, there are third-party things out there, like you guys might have seen these. There's all kinds of LUTs that are claiming, like, I'm going to remap your Blackmagic camera into an Arri sensitivity or whatever it might be. Those can use and often are using like much more complex nonlinear things to try to get a tighter match to what the Arri camera would have done. But then you run into new challenges like, A, is that going to cause breakage or problems for me when I'm grading? And really fundamentally, do I want to be grading an image that has been disturbed to that extent before I even put my hands on it? Okay. So some ideas for, you could like do further reading on anything that I just brought up if you're so inclined. Go ask ChatGPT about it. I can't guarantee you're going to get good results. Go ask Claude about it. Maybe better person to ask. But you can find out more about those things. And to go back to the original question, I would say no. I would say color management and like the basic premise of like, okay, decode back to linear, apply a matrix, and then re-encode back to log. It's not sufficient to get a forensic match, but it does work, and it's very simple and very clean. So that takes preference for me over something like a highly complex 3D LUT that supposedly better aligns the camera primaries, but leaves me with a non-linear image that could break or that is going to be sensitive in ways that are sometimes hard to predict. Very long answer, but I hope that gives you lots and lots of good context and lots of good questions and avenues to explore in your continued learnings.
Let's take a break from DRTs for a second and go to different color models. Let's go specifically to HSV. We all know that HSV changes your lift gamma gain to essentially modifying your hue, saturation, and value. But what happens with the log wheels? Do they turn into a very specific saturation knob, for example, if you are modifying your highlights, midtones and blacks in the second channel?
Okay, color science geeks, let's go there. You guys are on fire today. Really good questions. So let me just get back to kind of home base with our image, and then we're going to chop that up. That's all correct. I haven't actually never worked with this image before, so I'm like, sure. Let's say that that's what it looks like. Yeah, so let's talk about this HSV thing. So let's just go back to a base image here. So when we're talking about HSV, you can see this in my template node tree that I have right now. I have flipped the color space of this node, having set up my color management properly. This wouldn't work if my color management wasn't set up properly in terms of my color management tags up here. specifically my timeline color space and my project settings. But since it is, I'm now in HSV. And just to clarify terminology and concepts a little bit, it is not that lift, gamma, gain are now hue, saturation, and value, respectively. It is that red, green, and blue are now hue, saturation, and value, okay? So anytime I am modifying my red channel with lift, gamma, or gain, or any other tool, I am affecting a change in hue. So you can see if I start sweeping my hue around, and actually for this to work, I've got to turn my channels back on, because right now I've only got channel 2 turned on, i.e. my saturation channel. But if I turn the others back on and I start looking at my red, I'm swinging my hues all around, right? How about our blue? Well, there's our value, right? Roughly brightness, whatever you want to call that. Okay? And then in the middle, of course, we have our saturation. I'm just working my green gain right now to get this saturation. So again, just a clarification, in HSV, lift, gamma, gain don't equal hue sat value. RG and B equal hue sat value. Okay? But to answer the question, like, what can we do with our log wheels, or even more broadly, are there other tools that we can use to manipulate these channels when we're in this model? Yeah, there definitely are. The thing we want to be mindful of is that the domain of these channels is a little bit counterintuitive. Now, what in the world does that sentence mean? The domain of these channels is a little bit counterintuitive. Here's what that means. This is where our custom curves can be our friends, guys. So check this out. I've got my custom curves turned on, and for the moment, let's look at our sat channel only. Like so. And if I flip over to working in that way, I want to look at my green sat channel specifically. So like within my, let me go back to my primaries over here. No, I don't want log wheels. I did want rig. There we go. So I'm going to work my sat here, and I actually want to say, I'm looking at my histograms. I want to look at the output. What's that going to do? That's going to allow me to see how I'm changing my saturation channel. So you can see at the baseline, my saturation channel. How do you know what I want to do here? Let's do something. I really want to get a cleaner visual on this. We're going to do a splitter combiner node, just so that we can get a cleaner histogram in our curves. So here's how we're going to move into HSV in a slightly different way. If you guys have never done this before, it's a cool trick to know about. So we're going to go into HSV using a CST. These gammas and this input color space doesn't really matter. It's just going to apply an RGB to HSV change no matter what. So we're going to say to HSV. And if we go over here, we're going to swap. We're going to say back to RGB. Okay. Now, if I did this correctly, there we go. So now this is what I wanted to see. I just wanted to look at my saturation channel. Okay. So the green is now my saturation channel. And you can see if I flip my histograms back to output, like so, you can see the results of what I'm doing. So the main thing to be aware of here is that, like, even with your primaries, the ranges, when I say the domain is not intuitive, I mean that the range of values and how they're distributed isn't the same as, like, gamma of your sat channel is not going to feel the same as gamma for the tonality of the image. It's not just going to affect the middle. It's going to have a much broader effect, and it's going to affect, like, it's going to affect more of the image because of the way the sat channel is distributed. But let's now go in and look at, like, the log wheels. So I've flipped over to my log wheels now, and we can once again look at the curves. And, like, here's me adjusting shadows. This is a good rule of thumb for you guys. Like, any adjustment when you're adjusting a sat channel that moves things off of 0, that would be lift, that would be offset, that would be your log shadows, that would be your custom curves where you grab that bottommost control point. That would be your shadows even, although there's multiple reasons not to use that with HSV. But any of those that are moving the bottom point, they can look sane. But, like, check this out. This image is a perfect example. Look at my neutrals here, at these whites. Like, well, why is that happening? Well, why it's happening is because I'm telling Resolve, hey, take things with a saturation value of 0 and increase their saturation. Well, what does that mean? If it truly has no saturation, that's like asking for I don't know, asking for something illogical, right? So that's why we're seeing that breakage and why we want to avoid anything that moves zero. So again, short list would be lift, log shadows, and your offset controls, okay? But are there other things within our log wheels that we can do? I'll be honest with you, I don't think I've ever messed around with this, so let's see if we can learn something. You can see how things are changing in the image. The thing to be aware of with the log wheels is they're narrower than your primaries, so they're more prone to break things apart that used to be right next to each other, right? But I'm working like my log midtone right now. Interestingly, if I look at my log highlights, I'm getting almost no change. I'm seeing a little change on the curve, but I'm really not seeing much change in the image, okay? And the way I'm exploring this right now, a great way to explore questions like the one that you just asked. How are these different tools going to affect my channels when I'm in HSV? And a couple things that I'll throw out there just to round this out. Places where I would explore, how do these controls affect me when I'm operating in HSV? Primaries are, of course, good. Log wheels are okay as long as you avoid your shadows and your offset as well. You could look at your custom curves for sure. It's going to get real wonky, but if you turn your preserved luminance off in your RGB mixer, you could play around with that as well. And look at like, I'm going to saturate based on the value of my image, because remember, blue is value. So you could play around with this and get good results. What I would not do would be HDR. I would not do shadows and highlights here in your primaries. I would not do, anything else like is pretty intuitive why you wouldn't want to, but those things, they don't just affect tonality, they affect texture, and they are working on your color channel as well as your tonality. So if they're expecting you to be in RGB, like for example, the HDR zones, then you're going to have trouble there. So I would not attempt those, or you can, but just look out for noise and artifacting that I promise you're going to end up creating sooner or later, probably sooner. But you can play around a lot with your log wheels, with your RGB mixer, and with your custom curves, and the way those help you to shape things out when you're in that conical HSV model instead of in RGB. All right, gang. Wow. I can't believe we spent an hour chopping that stuff up, but that was great. Thank you all so much for being here. Super good session, super good questions. Like I said, we got another video dropping this week on $24.99, another one of my absolute favorite DRTs. I'm pumped for you guys to check that one out. And I hope all of this emphasis on DRTs and the DRTs that are out there and how they can level up your grading game has been helpful for you guys, because it's been really great for me to revisit and to get to finally share with y'all the impact that this has had in my career, like as I've moved off of using stock tools like ACEs and Resolve CSTs and really started to critically evaluate where the opportunities are with choosing really well-built DRTs and to take advantage of DRTs built by two dudes who are here in the session with us. Thanks for being here, Jed and JP, and thanks for sharing your expertise and your cool tools with us. All right, my friends, I hope you guys have an awesome week, and I will see you here on the channel super soon. Take care.